I was halfway across the world when I got the email that my house had been foreclosed on. And for a moment, I genuinely thought someone was playing a sick joke on me. My name is Xavier Patterson, and I had been serving in the United States Army for 8 years when I received deployment orders to Kuwait. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Scottsdale, Arizona, part of the Desert Springs community with one of those homeowners associations that seem to think they ran a small kingdom rather than a neighborhood. Before my deployment, I had done everything by the book. I submitted my deployment paperwork to the HOA office, included copies of my military orders, filled out the Service Members Civil Relief Act forms, and even had my lawyer send a formal notification. I thought I had covered all my bases. The email came through on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, 6 months into my deployment. I was sitting in the dining facility on base, drinking terrible coffee and trying to video chat with my younger sister Melissa back home, when my phone buzzed with the notification. The subject line read, "Final notice property seizure complete." I nearly dropped my phone into my eggs. "Xavier, you okay?" Melissa asked, her face pixelated on the screen. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I think the HOA just told me they foreclosed on my house," I said, clicking through the email with shaking fingers. "That cannot be right. That cannot possibly be right." The email was from someone named Deborah Winters, president of the Desert Springs HOA board. It was formal, cold, and absolutely devastating. According to the document attached, I had failed to pay HOA dues for 6 consecutive months, ignored multiple notices and warnings, and the property had been sold at auction to cover the outstanding debt of $4,200. $4,200. I had almost $11,000 in my checking account. The dues were automatically withdrawn every month from that same account. "Call them right now," Melissa said, her voice rising with panic. "This has to be a mistake." But calling from Kuwait was not simple, and the time difference meant it was 2 in the morning in Arizona. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, barely able to focus on my duties. When I finally managed to reach the HOA office the next day, a cheerful receptionist told me that Deborah was unavailable and would return my call. She never did. Over the next week, I must have called 20 times. I sent emails. I had Melissa drive to the HOA office in person, and I even contacted my lawyer back in Phoenix. Each time, I hit a brick wall. Deborah was always in a meeting or out of the office or reviewing my case. The receptionist, whose name was Amy, sounded increasingly uncomfortable each time I called. "Mr. Patterson, I really think you need to speak with Mrs. Winters directly," Amy finally told me during one call. "But she has instructed me not to put your calls through. I am so sorry." "Why would she do that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I am deployed. I am serving my country. I submitted all the paperwork before I left." There was a long pause. "I should not say this, but I think there might have been a filing issue. Some paperwork got misplaced last year when we switched management companies." My stomach dropped. Misplaced. My deployment papers were misplaced. I really cannot say more. I could lose my job. I thanked her and hung up, my hands clenched into fists. This was not just incompetence. This was potentially illegal. The Service Members Civil Relief Act existed specifically to protect deployed military members from this exact situation. Foreclosing on a deployed service member's property was not just wrong, it was a federal violation. My lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who I had used for the house purchase, was sympathetic but initially seemed overwhelmed by the situation. "Xavier, this is bad," he told me during our next call. If they really did ignore your SCRA paperwork and proceeded with foreclosure anyway, they are in serious legal trouble. But I need to see all the documentation. Can you send me everything you filed? I had kept copies of everything, thank God. I sent Robert scanned copies of my deployment orders, the SCRA notification, the certified mail receipt showing the HOA had received my documents, and all the correspondence I had received from the HOA before I deployed. Robert went quiet for 2 days while he reviewed everything. When he called back, he sounded angry. They have no leg to stand on. Your paperwork was perfect. You followed every protocol. And get this, I pulled the records from the county clerk. Your automatic payments were processing every single month. You do not owe them a penny, let alone $4,000. Then, where did that number come from? I think they made it up, Robert said flatly. Or they applied your payments to someone else's account. I am filing an emergency motion to reverse the foreclosure, and I am also filing a federal complaint. Xavier, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I just want my house back, I said. Whatever it takes. The legal process was agonizingly slow, especially from 7,000 miles away. Robert filed the emergency motion in Maricopa County Superior Court, arguing that the foreclosure violated the SCRA and was invalid from the start. The judge scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out, which felt like an eternity. In the meantime, I had to continue my duties in Kuwait, trying to focus on my job while my entire life back home was falling apart. Melissa became my boots on the ground. She drove past my house and took photos. A young couple had apparently moved in, completely unaware that the house had been illegally foreclosed on. She also started digging into the HOA, talking to neighbors and finding out that I was not the first person Deborah Winters had targeted. Xavier, people here hate her, Melissa told me during one of our calls. I talked to Mrs. Chen down the street, not your lawyer but same last name, and she said Deborah has been driving people crazy for 2 years. Fines for everything, harassment about paint colors, threats about lawn maintenance. One guy told me she tried to fine him for having his garage door open too long. That does not surprise me, I said, but foreclosing on a deployed soldier, that is a whole different level. The hearing date arrived, and I managed to get approval to attend via video conference. I sat in a small office on base, my uniform pressed and my hair freshly cut, staring at a grainy video feed of the courtroom in Phoenix. Robert sat at a table on one side. On the other side sat Deborah Winters and the HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Judge Maria Hernandez presided, a stern woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She had clearly reviewed the case file thoroughly, because she started the hearing with a pointed question directed at the HOA's lawyer. Counselor, can you explain to me why your clients proceeded with foreclosure proceedings against a deployed service member who had properly filed all required SCRA notifications? The lawyer, whose name was Gregory Stone, cleared his throat. Your Honor, the HOA maintains that they never received proper notification of Mr. Patterson's deployment status. Furthermore, the dues were legitimately unpaid, and the HOA followed all required procedures under Arizona law and the CC and Artiques. That is a lie, I said, unable to stop myself. Robert shot me a warning look, but Judge Hernandez simply raised her hand. Mr. Patterson, I understand your frustration, but please let your attorney speak for you. However, she turned her gaze back to Stone, I have reviewed the evidence submitted, including the certified mail receipt showing that notification was delivered to the HOA office on October 15, 2023. I also have bank records showing that automatic payments were processed monthly. Would you care to explain these discrepancies? Stone shuffled papers, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, there may have been an administrative error in the transition between management companies. An administrative error that resulted in the illegal foreclosure of a deployed soldier's home. Judge Hernandez's voice was ice. Counselor, you understand that violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act carry serious penalties. For the first time, I saw Deborah Winters lean forward and whisper something urgently to Stone. He nodded and turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the HOA is willing to reverse the foreclosure and restore Mr. Patterson's ownership. That is not sufficient, Robert interjected. My client wants the foreclosure reversed, the title cleared, the current occupants removed, and full damages for the violation of his rights under the SCRA. We are also pursuing federal charges. Judge Hernandez nodded slowly. I am granting the emergency motion. The foreclosure is hereby reversed and deemed void from the date of filing. The HOA will restore Mr. Patterson's full ownership immediately, clear the title of any encumbrances, and coordinate the removal of the current occupants. I am also ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Patterson's legal fees and $10,000 in damages. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for investigation of potential SCRA violations. We are adjourned. The gavel came down, and I felt something loosen in my chest. But it was not over yet, not by a long shot. The current occupants, a couple named Travis and Jennifer Morrison, were understandably devastated when they learned the house had been illegally foreclosed on. They had purchased it in good faith at the HOA auction for $83,000, well below market value, thinking they had gotten a deal. Now they were losing their home and their money. Melissa met with them at my request, and they were crying in my living room that they thought was theirs. We did not know, Jennifer kept saying. We never would have bought it if we knew. We have 2 little kids. Where are we supposed to go? Melissa, to her credit, was kind. This is not your fault. The HOA defrauded you just like they defrauded my brother. You need to sue them to get your money back. Travis, a thick-necked guy who worked in construction, was angrier. That woman, Deborah, she told us this was a legitimate foreclosure. She showed us all the paperwork. How were we supposed to know it was fake? Because it was too good to be true, Melissa said gently. A house in this neighborhood for $83,000. That alone should have been a red flag. They moved out within 2 weeks and immediately filed their own lawsuit against the HOA. I actually felt terrible for them. They were victims in this too, just trying to buy their first home. With the house legally mine again, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I got a message from Amy, the HOA receptionist. She sent it to my personal email, not through official channels. Mr. Patterson, I quit my job today. I cannot work for these people anymore. I thought you should know that Deborah has been falsifying records. Your deployment paperwork was not misplaced. She saw it and ignored it. She told me to mark your account as delinquent even though the payments were coming through. I have copies of emails that prove it. I am willing to testify if you need me to. I forwarded the email to Robert immediately. He called me within an hour and he sounded excited in a way lawyers rarely sound. This is it, Xavier. This is proof of intentional wrongdoing. This is not incompetence or an administrative error. This is fraud. This is potentially criminal. What do we do with it? I am contacting the U.S. Attorney's Office right now. This is federal. And honestly, with this evidence, I think we should also contact the FBI. Wire fraud, mail fraud, violations of the SCRA, this could result in serious prison time. Things escalated quickly after that. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona opened a formal investigation. The FBI got involved. And suddenly, Deborah Winters was not just a tyrannical HOA president, she was a potential federal criminal. I was still in Kuwait during all of this, watching it unfold from thousands of miles away like some surreal television show. Melissa kept me updated almost daily. Federal agents showed up at the HOA office with a warrant and seized all the records. Deborah was brought in for questioning. Other victims started coming forward. It turned out that I was not the only one. The FBI investigation uncovered that Deborah had been systematically targeting homeowners she thought were vulnerable or absent. She had foreclosed on 3 other properties over the past 18 months, pocketing money from the auctions and falsifying records to cover her tracks. One of those properties belonged to an elderly woman named Dorothy Kemp, who had been in a nursing home recovering from a stroke. Another belonged to a divorced father named Marcus Hayes, who had been working overseas as a contractor. The third was a rental property owned by an investor who lived in California and did not check his mail regularly. The total amount Deborah had embezzled was over $300,000. When I finally learned the full scope of what she had done, I felt sick. This was not just about my house anymore. This was a predator who had been systematically targeting and stealing from people for years. The federal charges came down in June 2024. Deborah Winters was indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, theft, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The U.S. Attorney held a press conference, and I watched it streamed live on my laptop in Kuwait. Deborah Winters abused her position of trust as HOA president to systematically defraud homeowners in her community, the prosecutor said. She specifically targeted vulnerable individuals including deployed military members, the elderly, and those living out of state. Her actions were calculated, intentional, and caused tremendous harm. We are committed to holding her accountable to the fullest extent of the law. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. My deployment ended in August 2024, and I finally flew home to Arizona. Melissa picked me up from the airport, and we drove straight to my house. She had been taking care of it since the Morrisons moved out, mowing the lawn and making sure everything was maintained. When I walked through the front door, it felt like walking into a stranger's house. So much had happened, so much had changed, and I had not been there for any of it. "Welcome home," Melissa said softly, hugging me tight. "I am so glad you are back." We ordered pizza and sat in my living room, and she caught me up on everything I had missed. The HOA had completely imploded after Deborah's arrest. Half the board had resigned in disgrace. The management company had terminated their contract. The remaining homeowners were trying to figure out how to move forward. "People have been asking about you," Melissa said. "They want to thank you. If you had not fought this, none of it would have come to light." "I just wanted my house back," I said. "I did not set out to take down a criminal enterprise. But you did. You should be proud." The trial was scheduled for March 2025, almost a year after I first received that devastating email. Robert kept me informed of all the pre-trial motions and developments. Deborah's lawyer tried every trick in the book to get the charges dismissed or reduced. Nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming. I was subpoenaed to testify, which meant I had to take time off from my new assignment at Fort Huachuca to travel back to Phoenix. The federal courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all glass and steel and serious-faced security guards. Robert met me outside, shaking my hand firmly. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be." The courtroom was packed with people, other victims and their families, reporters, curious onlookers. Deborah sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a bun, looking nothing like the tyrant I had heard so much about. She looked like someone's aunt, like a librarian or a church volunteer. It was jarring. I was the prosecution's star witness. I took the stand, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Ruiz, walked me through everything. My deployment orders, the paperwork I filed, the automatic payments, the email notification that my house had been foreclosed on, the desperate phone calls from Kuwait, all of it. Mr. Patterson, when you learned your house had been foreclosed on, what went through your mind? Patricia asked. I thought it was a mistake at first, I said. I thought there was no way this could actually be happening. I had done everything right. I had followed every rule, and I was deployed serving my country. It felt like a betrayal. Did you owe the HOA any money? No. My bank records prove that the automatic payments were processing every month. I did not owe them a penny. Patricia nodded and pulled up documents on the courtroom screen. These are emails between the defendant, Deborah Winters, and the former HOA receptionist, Amy Thornton. In this email dated November 2nd, 2023, what does Miss Winters instruct Miss Thornton to do? I looked at the screen and read aloud. Mark Patterson account as delinquent. Do not process October or November payments. We will proceed with foreclosure after 90 days. And what date had you filed your deployment notification? October 15th, 2023. 2 weeks before this email. So the defendant received your deployment paperwork, saw that you were protected under federal law, and made a deliberate decision to ignore that and proceed with foreclosure anyway. Yes. Why do you think she did that? Deborah's lawyer objected, saying I could not speak to her motives, and the judge sustained it. But the point had been made. The cross-examination was brutal. Deborah's lawyer, a man named Kenneth Palmer, tried to paint me as a disgruntled homeowner who had not properly followed HOA rules, who had let my property fall into disrepair, who had been difficult to work with. None of it was true, and Robert had prepared me well. I stayed calm, stuck to the facts, and did not let him rattle me. Mr. Patterson, is it not true that you received multiple warnings about your lawn maintenance before your deployment? Palmer asked. No, that is not true. My lawn was professionally maintained by a landscaping company that I hired specifically to ensure compliance while I was gone. But you did receive notices from the HOA, did you not? I received one notice about a mailbox that needed repainting. I had it painted within a week. That was 9 months before my deployment. Palmer moved on, realizing he was not going to trip me up. After an hour, I was dismissed, and I felt like I had run a marathon. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Other victims testified. Amy Thornton, the former receptionist, testified and provided damning evidence about Deborah's instructions to falsify records. Forensic accountants walked the jury through the paper trail showing exactly where the embezzled money had gone. A lot of it to Deborah's personal accounts, used for vacations, shopping sprees, and home renovations. The defense's strategy seemed to be that Deborah was overwhelmed and made mistakes, that she had not intended to hurt anyone, that she was just trying to enforce the HOA rules. It was a weak argument, and the jury saw through it. On April 4, 2025, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. Guilty on all 14 counts. I was not in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I was back at Fort Huachuca, but Robert called me immediately. We won, he said simply. Guilty on everything. I sat down hard on my bed, suddenly dizzy. What happens now? Sentencing in about 8 weeks. She is looking at serious prison time, Xavier. Probably 10 to 15 years, maybe more. Deborah's sentencing hearing was in late May 2025, and this time I made sure to be there. The courtroom was even more packed than during the trial. All 4 of her victims were there, along with family members and supporters. I sat in the front row with Melissa on one side and Robert on the other. Judge Harold Morrison, who had presided over the trial, was a grandfatherly figure with white hair and a reputation for being fair but tough. He had clearly been appalled by the evidence presented during the trial. "Mrs. Winters, please stand," he said. Deborah stood, her lawyer beside her. She had been crying, her face blotchy and red. Judge Morrison put on his reading glasses and looked at some papers in front of him. "I have presided over many cases in my 30 years on the bench. I have seen a lot of human behavior, both good and bad. But I must say, your case stands out as particularly egregious. You were entrusted with a position of authority in your community. Your neighbors elected you to lead the HOA, to protect their interests, to maintain their property values. Instead, you systematically abused that trust to steal from them." He paused, letting that sink in. "What makes your crimes especially reprehensible is that you specifically targeted the most vulnerable. Mr. Patterson was deployed overseas, defending our country, and you saw that as an opportunity to steal his home. Mrs. Kemp was recovering from a stroke in a nursing home, unable to defend herself, and you stole her home. Mr. Hayes was working abroad to support his children after a difficult divorce, and you stole his home. These were not mistakes. These were not administrative errors. These were calculated, intentional acts of theft and fraud." Deborah was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 12 years. The defense has asked for leniency, citing your lack of prior criminal history and your expressions of remorse. I have considered both arguments carefully. Mrs. Winters, do you have anything you would like to say before I impose sentence?" Deborah tried to speak, but her voice broke. Her lawyer whispered something to her, and she tried again. "I am so sorry," she managed to say. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I made terrible mistakes, and I will regret them for the rest of my life. I am sorry to Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Kemp and Mr. Hayes and Mr. Chen and everyone I hurt. I am so sorry." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "I believe you are sorry, Mrs. Winters. I believe you regret what you have done. But remorse does not erase the harm you caused. 4 families lost their homes because of your actions. Mr. Patterson fought to get his house back while serving overseas, enduring stress and uncertainty that no service member should have to face. Mrs. Kemp lost her family home of 40 years and passed away before this case was resolved. Your actions may have contributed to her decline. That is something you will have to live with." He paused again, and the courtroom was absolutely silent. "I am sentencing you to 14 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also pay full restitution to all victims, including Mr. Patterson's legal fees and the damages awarded by the civil court. You will forfeit all assets obtained through your criminal activity, and you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA or community leadership position." The gavel came down, and it was over. Deborah was led away by federal marshals, still crying. I watched her go and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, nothing. Just a deep exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. I gave a brief statement, thanking my lawyer and my sister, and talking about the importance of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Then, Melissa and I got in her car and drove back to Scottsdale in silence. The civil lawsuits took longer to resolve, but eventually, all 4 victims received full restitution. I got my legal fees back, plus the $10,000 in damages from the initial court order, plus additional compensation from the HOA's insurance company. The Morrisons, the couple who had unknowingly bought my house at the fraudulent auction, also received a settlement that covered their purchase price and moving expenses. The Desert Springs HOA itself had to be completely restructured. A court-appointed mediator oversaw the election of an entirely new board. New management was hired. Stricter oversight and financial controls were put in place. It would take years for the community to fully recover from the damage Deborah had done, both financially and to trust between neighbors. As for me, I eventually decided to sell the house. It held too many bad memories, and I was being reassigned to Virginia in early 2026 anyway. The sale went smoothly, and I actually made a decent profit thanks to the hot Arizona housing market. I bought a smaller condo near my new base, something simpler with lower maintenance and definitely no HOA. Melissa threw me a going-away party before I left for Virginia. A bunch of neighbors came, including some people I barely knew but who wanted to thank me for exposing what Deborah had been doing. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had warned Melissa about Deborah early on, brought me homemade cookies and gave me a long hug. "You are a good man, Xavier," she said. "You did not just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us. Thank you." Marcus Hayes, one of the other victims, shook my hand firmly. "I was working in Dubai when I found out she had stolen my house. I felt so powerless, so angry. When I heard you were fighting back, I got the courage to fight too. We would not have won without you." I did not feel like a hero. I just felt like a guy who had done what anyone would do when their home was stolen. But I appreciated their words. The party wound down, and eventually it was just Melissa and me cleaning up cups and plates. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "After everything that happened?" "Yeah," I said. "I think so. It was a nightmare, but it is over now, and at least some good came out of it. Deborah is in prison where she belongs. Other people got their justice. The HOA has been fixed. That counts for something." "You could have just let it go," Melissa pointed out. "You could have taken the settlement and moved on. Instead, you pushed for a criminal investigation. You made sure she faced real consequences." "She violated federal law," I said simply. "She specifically targeted me because I was deployed because she thought I could not fight back. That is not something you let go. That is something you stand up to." Melissa hugged me. "I am proud of you, big brother." "I could not have done any of it without you," I said. "You were my eyes and ears here while I was gone. You took care of everything. Thank you. That is what family does." I left for Virginia 2 weeks later, driving cross-country with all my belongings packed in a moving truck. It felt like closing a chapter, leaving behind the stress and chaos of the past 18 months. But I also felt a sense of peace. I had fought for what was right. I had won. And maybe, just maybe, I had made things a little bit better for the next deployed service member who had to deal with an HOA. The drive took 4 days, crossing through New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and finally into Virginia. I listened to audiobooks and podcasts, stopped at diners and roadside motels, and let the miles put distance between me and everything that had happened. When I finally pulled up to my new condo in Virginia Beach, I sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the building. It was modern, clean, and blessedly HOA-free. I grabbed my keys and walked to the front door, ready to start fresh. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Saw the news today. Deborah's appeal was denied. Sentence stands. Thought you would want to know." I smiled and texted back. "Thanks for everything, Robert. Could not have done this without you. You earned justice, Xavier. Enjoy your new place." I unlocked the door and stepped inside my new home. It was empty, echoing, full of possibility. I had been through hell, fought a system that tried to crush me, and come out the other side stronger. Not everyone gets that kind of closure. The next few months were about rebuilding and settling into my new assignment. I made new friends, explored Virginia Beach, and slowly let go of the anger and frustration that had consumed me for so long. The legal nightmare had taken its toll, but it had also taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, about not backing down even when the fight seems impossible. In August 2025, I received an unexpected letter from Dorothy Kemp's daughter, a woman named Susan. I had never met her, but I knew her mother had been one of Deborah's victims and had passed away before seeing justice. "Dear Mr. Patterson," the letter read, "I wanted to thank you for your courage in fighting Deborah Winters. My mother lost her home while she was sick and unable to defend herself. She died not knowing if we would ever get justice. Because of your fight, because you refused to let it go, Deborah was held accountable. My mother's name was cleared, and we received restitution that helped pay for her funeral and medical bills. I know my mother would have been grateful. Thank you for being the kind of person who stands up for what is right, even when it is hard. God bless you and keep you safe." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. That made it all worth it. Not the money, not the legal victory, but knowing that I had helped someone else get justice, even if they did not live to see it. I framed the letter and hung it on my wall, a reminder of why the fight had mattered. Life moved forward. I continued my service in the Army, got promoted to sergeant, and threw myself into my work. The memories of the HOA nightmare faded, becoming just another story, another challenge I had overcome. But I never forgot the lessons I learned. In December 2025, I was contacted by a journalist writing an article about HOA abuse and the exploitation of deployed service members. She had heard about my case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, hoping that sharing my story might help others avoid the same nightmare. The article ran in February 2026, just before I started writing down my full story. It got a lot of attention, and I received messages from other service members who had faced similar situations. Some were still fighting their battles. I connected them with Robert and other lawyers who specialized in SCRA cases. I shared my experience and offered whatever advice I could. One message stood out, from a young Marine named Jackson who was about to deploy to Japan. "Sir, I read your story and immediately checked my HOA paperwork. Turns out they never processed my deployment notification. Because of your article, I caught it before I left and got everything sorted out. You probably saved me from going through what you went through. Thank you." That message reminded me why telling the story mattered. One person's nightmare could be another person's warning, could prevent the same thing from happening again. Now, sitting in my condo in Virginia Beach, looking back on everything that happened, I feel grateful. Grateful for my sister who stood by me. Grateful for my lawyer who fought for me. Grateful for Amy who had the courage to come forward with evidence. Grateful for a justice system that, despite its flaws, ultimately worked. And grateful that I had the resources and support to fight back when many others in my situation might not have. Deborah Winters is serving her 14-year sentence in a federal prison in California. She will be eligible for parole in 2033 when she will be 68 years old. I hope she uses that time to reflect on the harm she caused and to become a better person. I do not hate her, but I do not forgive her either. Some things cannot be forgiven, only acknowledged and moved past. The Desert Springs HOA is apparently thriving now under new leadership. Property values have recovered. The community has come together. New families are moving in, unaware of the drama that unfolded just a few years ago. That is probably for the best. As for me, I am doing well. I have 9 more years until I can retire from the Army with full benefits. I have been thinking about what comes next, maybe using my GI Bill to go back to school, maybe starting a small business, maybe just traveling and seeing the world on my own terms instead of under military orders. Whatever I do, I will never forget the lesson that deployment taught me, not about combat or service or sacrifice, but about the importance of fighting for what is right, even when you are exhausted, even when you are thousands of miles away, even when the system seems stacked against you. Sometimes the battles we fight at home are just as important as the battles we fight abroad. And sometimes, justice actually prevails. Looking back at the whole ordeal now, from the initial shock of that email in Kuwait to the final sentencing hearing, it feels almost surreal. How did a simple deployment turn into a federal criminal case? How did doing everything right still result in losing my home, at least temporarily? The answer is that systems are only as good as the people running them, and when those people are corrupt, the system fails. But the flip side is also true. When good people stand up, when they fight back, when they refuse to accept injustice, the system can also work. It is not perfect, it is not fast, and it is not easy, but it can work. I received one final update from Robert in January 2026. The HOA's insurance company had settled the last of the civil claims, and the court had officially closed all related cases. It was truly, finally over. "You should be proud, Xavier," Robert told me during that final call. "What you did was not easy. Most people would have given up. You changed things for the better." "I just wanted my house back," I said, echoing what I had said so many times before. "Maybe that is what makes it matter," Robert replied. "You were not trying to be a hero. You were not trying to make headlines. You just wanted what was rightfully yours." That is the purest form of justice. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, closing that chapter of my life for good. Tonight, as I finish telling this story, I am sitting on my balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It is a clear night, stars visible despite the city lights, and I can hear the waves in the distance. My life is peaceful now. Simple. Exactly what I need after years of chaos. Tomorrow I report for duty at 0600. We are running training exercises for new recruits, teaching them about leadership and responsibility, and doing the right thing even when it is hard. I will tell them about integrity and honor, values that are not just military concepts but life concepts. I probably will not tell them about the HOA nightmare. That is not a military story. But it is a life story, one that taught me just as much as any deployment or training exercise. The truth is, I was lucky. Lucky to have resources, lucky to have support, lucky to have a sister who dropped everything to help me, lucky to have a lawyer who believed in my case. Not everyone has those advantages. That is why it was so important to push for criminal charges, to make sure Deborah faced real consequences. Because for every deployed service member who has the resources to fight back, there are probably dozens who do not, who just lose their homes and have no recourse. The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a powerful law, but it only works if people enforce it. If HOAs and creditors know they can ignore it without consequences, they will. Deborah learned that lesson the hard way, and hopefully, other HOA presidents around the country saw the news coverage and thought twice before trying something similar. I stood up and stretched, breathing in the salt air. Inside my condo, my life was laid out in boxes and furniture and personal belongings. Not much, but enough. Everything I needed to be comfortable and happy. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from Melissa with a photo of her new apartment in Phoenix. She had finally moved out of her old place and into something nicer, something with a view of Camelback Mountain. New beginnings for both of us, her message said. Love you, big brother. I smiled and sent back a heart emoji, then tucked my phone in my pocket and went inside. The story of how my HOA ignored my deployment paperwork and tried to steal my house was finally, completely, totally over. Justice had been served. Lives had moved forward. The bad guy was in prison. The good guys had won. And tomorrow, I would wake up and continue serving my country, secure in the knowledge that my home, my property, my rights were protected. That is all any of us really want: security, justice, and the chance to build a life worth living. Sometimes you have to fight for those things. Sometimes the fight is long and hard and exhausting. But it is always worth it in the end. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, ready for whatever came next, knowing that I could handle it. After everything I had been through, after staring down a corrupt HOA president from 7,000 miles away and winning, I could handle just about anything. The nightmare was over. The future was bright, and I was finally, truly home.